What happens when we die? To understand what happens after we die, it's helpful to go back to the beginning. And I'm not talking about birth or conception or even the first inklings of life on this planet. As you've probably heard, every atom in our bodies was forged in the hearts of exploding stars over the course of almost 15 billion years, which means that the material in our bodies is intimately connected to the material of the cosmos. But hold on, because if we want to really go back to the beginning, even the stars are far too young. Before the creation of the universe, there was only energy. There was no space, no time, nothing but the potential to become something new. The crucible of the singularity wasn't only the inception of the universe, it was the universe. There were no atoms, no molecules, no sound or even light, only potential. What is truly mind-boggling about that moment is that everything that would one day form the stars and the galaxies and every piece of your own body, everything that would one day experience consciousness was at that time completely undifferentiated from each other. There was nothing separate that would become you and absolutely everything else in the universe. It was literally all one. Then something happened. And it's the greatest unsolved mystery in physics. That single point of everything began to create space and time around it as it exploded outward. Now, scientists have no idea what triggered the expansion, nor can they explain the speed at which it happened. But this year's Nobel Prize in Physics added one single detail to the picture: that everything came out of the Big Bang had the potential of entanglement. It's what Einstein called spooky action at a distance. The mathematical details are mind-boggling, but it boils down to that the universe remains intimately interconnected, no matter where you are in it. All of what I've told you so far is physics. It's verifiable, it's peer-reviewed, and the very limits of what we can tell about reality through observations and instrumentation. But now, I'm going to make a statement that pushes science just one tiny step forward in a way that I believe explains much of reality as we know it, as well as consciousness and, yes, death. The Big Bang wasn't just an explosion of energy and matter. It was also an explosion of consciousness. Insofar as this makes sense on a cosmic level, the singularity created itself. And I believe that act of creation was also a decision. Okay, that sounds sort of crazy, but the late great American mystic Alan Watts once summarized the history of religious and scientific thought in a single sentence: you are the universe becoming aware of itself. And I believe that he wasn't only correct, but that this is a fundamental force that animates everything around us. Consciousness doesn't only exist at the level of words and thoughts in our heads, but in the accumulated experiences that we've been through and the infinite influences that occurred before we arrived here, dating all the way back to the Big Bang. And that continues, all of those effects continue after we've been left behind. And this is why neuroscientists have never been able to locate the mind and the bundle of neurons and electrical impulses in your brain. Yet at the same time, they tend not to realize that the very act of trying to study the material reality of consciousness begins with a conscious act to study in the first place. It's like they're swimming in consciousness and can't even recognize it. The experiences that you have are just one part of a giant interconnected whole that began with the very creation of the universe. Given all of this, the question of what happens when we die is, in a way, completely wrong. The fear of death is objectively meaningless because there is no you. You are simply part of that singularity coming to grips with the thought of cessation. Whatever the electrical impulses are in our brain, the vast interconnection of neurons that animate our thoughts, it's just one part of that giant pool of consciousness that existed in the beginning. When we die, the sensations and experiences of what we are return to that pool like water and send ripples out in all directions, just like we have received the ripples before us. Now, I can tell you from my own experiences that I've come close to dying on several occasions. Most recently, just this summer, when I almost drowned in a whirlpool. And what I can say for sure is that the anticipation of dying, the fear of it, the thinking of it happening shortly, and the fear of losing our ego-driven sense of self is worse than the actual dissolution of the self. Death probably feels exactly the same as the time before birth and before conception. It's a time when your consciousness is simply part of that giant ocean of consciousness writ large. Think of it as a return home, where the energy of your mind, of your consciousness remains, even if your awareness of it gets forgotten like a dream.